My name is Katharina Menne.
And my name is Ina Karabasz.
And we will lead you through this discussion on shaping Europe's quantum future.
Well, quantum future, it's easy to say, but the message is definitely strong because it's still a big experiment. We're not quite sure where we're going to end up, but it's definitely something that we could possibly need in the society, in the business world, because they have a huge potential if they come true, or when they come true.
The German government's expert council on quantum computing has even declared them there used to be a question of technological sovereignty in global competition with the USA and China.
Yeah, but there will be a lot of money in it, and there is a lot of money in it already because it's important for the European Union, so people do invest. Countries do invest quite a lot in this technology, and it's very important. Why do they do that? Because everyone wants to be ahead and everyone wants their stake in the game, and this is what we're going to talk about today.
And how this can be achieved, what challenges still await researchers along the way, and what stage of realization we are currently at. These are the topics we would like to discuss with our 4 guests today. A very warm welcome. We are talking to Robert Axmann, head of the Quantum Computing Initiative at the German Aerospace Center. To Jan Goetz, CEO of the Finnish startup IQM Quantum Computers and board member of the European Innovation Council. To Tommaso Calarco, director of the Institute for Quantum Control of the Peter Grünberg Institute at the Forschungszentrum Jülich and professor for quantum information at the University of Cologne. And last but not least, Jaya Baloo, Chief Information Security Officer of Avast and former member of the EU High-Level Steering Committee of the Quantum Flagship. We are very pleased that you are here today and discuss with us. Before we start into the discussion, we would like to invite you, dear viewers, to participate actively, like you may have already in the other sessions. Post your questions on the Slido platform, and we will try to include them in the conversation at the appropriate point. You will find the link on the event page. But now, we'd like to start.
Definitely, we're super curious about your question. My first question would definitely be, we've just mentioned it, there is a lot of fantasy about quantum computing and what it could possibly be and what it could possibly do. Maybe we start with the question, what's your best possible outcome? What's your fantasy about quantum computing? Maybe a concrete product that you have in mind or a concrete idea that you have in mind. And maybe we start with you, Mrs. Baloo.
Of course. I think, this last year has shown us how difficult it's been with the onset of Corona. It was already difficult, but with the subsequent iterations of the virus, we've seen how difficult it is to have a vaccine that's able to target all the different mutations, as well as having the least amount of side effects. I think one of the biggest advantages of a potential quantum revolution is what it could mean for personalized health and better drug delivery and targeted medicines. So I'm really hoping that this type of innovation actually in our day-to-day lives and as our society evolves with potentially new mutating viruses and sicknesses, that can actually bring some foundational benefits to our society.
That's huge, definitely. How about you, Mr. Calarco?
Well, I was going to say something in the same direction, quantum simulation, using quantum computers to sort of understand and develop new chemicals and also new drugs. But not only that, but also quantum simulation for new materials. For instance, in the field of energy, like if we manage to develop, for instance, room temperature superconductors, the ability to carry electric currents without resistance, we would immediately, gain 50% of the world's electric power, which goes dissipated on electric lines. So not using a quantum computer in our home, but using indirectly the huge benefit which this can bring in terms of development of new materials and new chemicals.
Mr. Goetz, you're building quantum computers and you might have something in mind what you can probably use it for when you sell them. What's your idea?
Well, of course, I think we can, if we really think about vision, we can even kind of broaden the scope a little bit. And if you look at what is happening on the classical side, for example, we are talking about smart homes. There are sensors in it. Actually, there are quantum sensors out there. It's not only quantum computing, and you can do crazy things with them, like measuring brain activities. And then your smart home, it's communicating whatever it has measured to you. So there's also the communication part. And also this exists in quantum communication, which is a very fascinating field. And then this information is processed. And then this is what we call quantum computing. And I think the big vision is really kind of, can we bring all of this together and build something like a quantum internet or quantum kind of connected world? And of course, this is very far-fetched, but I think this is very exciting, kind of how to bring these different technologies and approaches together to build something where quantum is kind of playing a big role in most of these fields.
So we already have a great idea of what you can probably do with it. Mr. Axmann, do you have something to put into this discussion, which is some topic that we haven't talked about yet?
I think basically all the main fields have been covered already, but it's very interesting to see what's developed in the area of algorithms and the potential use cases, and to fetch on the ideas of Tommaso, for example. If we go further with optimization, we can imagine that we will see in the future quantum computers to be used for optimization of transport routes, of logistics, of planning for traveling for airplanes, and this might have a significant effect on the future and the future energy consumption of our society. So there will be many potential areas where quantum computer can bring big improvements in the society.
I have to say, it all sounds really good, and it's also very exciting, and I guess we all can't wait until we actually get there. But there is a lot of people out there, and I guess it's most who say like they've heard of quantum computing, but they don't really know what it is. And to be totally honest, it's not easy to describe. But Mr. Calarco, maybe you want to try.
It's actually very easy. The point is that you have a computer which is made of transistors. So those are currents you switch on or off, like switching on or off the light. Now, what is the idea with a quantum computer? Instead of very many electrons, that's electronics, currents of many electrons. Now I take one atom, I take one quantum. So this means that it is the smallest unit, the smallest object I can possibly have. And then this brings new possibilities. What is the new possibility? Is that, my electric current in my transistor can be on or off, 0 or 1. If I want to make a choice, for instance, we were speaking about logistics. How do I find the best path for my packet boat, for my delivery service in the morning, It's like in a labyrinth. And at every point, it will have to say, do I go right? Do I go left? It's like finding the exit in a labyrinth. But now, if I do it with the quantum systems, what happens is that my individual atom, my qubit, since it is very small, it is a quantum object, it can be at the same time 0 and 1. Now I'm using it to solve a problem. So if I describe a problem like finding the best path, I can go at the same time left and right. And this means that I can explore all possibilities just in one go. I do not need anymore to try all possible paths, but I send it through once and I will find the solution. So this idea of I'm using single quanta with these new properties of superposition between different paths, it means it enhances enormously the efficiency of my computation because it goes everything in parallel. In one go, I can get my solution.
That definitely sounds like a good solution, but I do want to check with you, Mr. Goetz, when customers hear or potential customers hear that kind of explanation, which is probably sometimes for people difficult to imagine. Do they say immediately, well, of course, I get it?
No, I think most people don't immediately get it, but I don't also know if this is the point, because if you ask someone on the street how exactly the technology in the smartphone works that this person is using, usually they cannot explain it also very well. So I think for the user, the main point is, do I have a benefit when I use the technology? I guess if we take this example that was just brought up about the optimal route, often, I mean, if you do this, if you use your smartphone to find the best route between two places, this path is not being calculated on your smartphone, but it's sent to some server which sits somewhere where the algorithm is run, and then the answer comes back. And you don't even know what kind of a computer has solved this problem. Is it a big one? Is it a small one? Where does it stand? All these things you don't care because you're just interested in the solution. And I think this is also about quantum. Maybe you will be using it at some point and you don't even know that there was a quantum computer in the background solving it. And the only thing that matters for the user is to understand, okay, there is a benefit. Now I get the result much faster or more accurate or whatever. And I think this is the way we should somehow explain it to people, just show the potential that it can unlock and say, okay, there is a solid technology that we are developing and we have trust in the technology and this is why it works. And then the people will use it at some point and create value with it.
This all sounds very good to me and probably also to all our viewers, but let's talk status quo. Where are we in the development now? When can we actually use the computer for something useful? Maybe Mr. Axmann can answer.
Okay, where are we at the moment? I think it's not a very easy question because many of the actors in the field of quantum computing are saying at the moment we are in the second quantum revolution. So we are able to develop and manipulate qubits, and we are about to show that quantum computers can bring the quantum advantage, the advantage of quantum computers over classical supercomputers. And we are close to this threshold at the moment. And what we see at the moment, we do have many companies, many startups investing in quantum computing. They are active, like Jan, for example, with this company. And we have many anchor customers like the federal initiatives in Germany or also in other European countries, which are active to develop this ecosystem into a direction that we are able in the future to provide those solutions mentioned before, that we can get calculations from quantum computers, from classical supercomputers without knowing who is calculating or which system is calculating this and be able to use the entire power of quantum computing. But at the moment, it takes quite a while to get all the developments which have been made throughout the last decades in the labs, in the academia, through companies, through startups and small and medium enterprises into the economic value chain.
Mm-hmm. Talking about status quo, Google said, Mrs. Baloo, Google said in 2019 they achieved quantum supremacy. What does that mean?
Basically, what they're saying is that they can do a particular problem faster and better than a classical computer could do. So the idea of supremacy is one that's still very hotly contested, simply because the problem that they choose to solve is not one that's always recognized in the academic community as one that's worth solving. That being put aside, I think the biggest thing that it shows you is that there is a viable use case and scenario where the quantum computer has reached a level of maturity for which we can actually then throw applications at it. So that's really the reason for doing this demonstration, is to show that you have something that's actually meaningful that can you work on further and show some level of advancement.
So now we're talking about some factors that might bring into detail how far we have come. IBM said a couple of months ago they built a quantum chip with 127 qubits. They set world record. Now, Mr. Calarco, Jülich said, I think just a month ago, they have now the world's most sufficient quantum computer with 5,000 qubits. But I heard it's another system. It's a quantum annealer. Maybe you can explain to us what the difference is and what you can actually do with this and what you might be able to do with the 127 qubit chip of IBM.
Yes, as a matter of fact, the machine from D-Wave is not really a quantum computer. It's a quantum annealer, meaning that, it's even not clear we can call those qubits, because if you wanted to say I have 5,000 qubits, it means every one of them I need to be able to manipulate. So this is not what this D-Wave quantum annealer can do. It can do some global manipulation, which can find some minimum of some function. It doesn't use the full power of quantum entanglement between all the qubits. It uses some quantum effects, so it can bring some speed up, but certainly not the enormous speed up that for instance, Google has demonstrated. For that, you really need a universal quantum computer, meaning something in which you can write any kind of operation among any 2 qubits. As a matter of fact, IBM has the big announcement, but something which we will see next year is that in the pilot project for the European quantum computing and simulation infrastructure, we are going to install in Jülich and in Paris 2 copies of a quantum computer from a French startup company, Pascal, which has at the moment 150 qubits, and it will have in the next iteration 250, 300. First used for quantum simulation, like the problems that we said before in chemistry or material science, and then it can be also used as a quantum computer. So even though the number of units is smaller, 5,000 units, but not really qubits in the D-Wave machine, and only 200, 300 in this machine, then this can be much more flexible, much more powerful. And so also, bring from quantum supremacy, which is, as Jaya was saying, a quantum computer which outperforms a classical supercomputer, but on a problem which is of purely academic interest, instead going to quantum advantage to beating a classical computer on a problem which has practical value. That is what we do not yet have. That is the next step in the evolution.
Talking about next steps, we've just heard the name Google quite a bit. We've heard the name IBM quite a bit. Mr. Goetz, that are big US players. How do you want to compete with them?
Well, of course, the company size, the total company size is one thing. If you want to make a fair comparison, you have to compare their quantum efforts to what is happening in other companies, because not the whole, like Google company is working on quantum computing. And I think what we have, especially now we're talking about Europe, what we have in Europe is really great people with great ideas and great technology. And if you look at kind of where different companies or also still research group are, it's not that far away from each other. And it's, of course, for outsiders hard to understand, because some people, we're talking about annealers, cold atoms, all these different technologies. But I think generally we are just at the beginning. And I think you can very nicely compare to classical computing. Also there in the beginning, different technologies have been tried, vacuum tubes and others. And I think this is roughly where we are. And we are trying to find out which is the most scalable. And also I think what we're building now, it was mentioned by Robert Axmann, is this kind of ecosystem. So we need to make sure that there is a supply chain, for example, for the pieces and equipment in place. And there are the users and everything goes together. So I think we are at this stage, and this is what we are trying in Europe, is we don't have these big giants, so we have to do it some other way. And I think the way is to combine startups with academia, with RTOs, and bring all of them together to build a large-scale system that works.
But there just one question on top to you, Mr. Goetz, because you just said like Google, not all of Google works on quantum. Of course, the same goes for IBM. Meanwhile, if they do decide to shift a lot of money to that field, they have it. They have that amount of money, and they can just throw it at it. In the European Union, do you feel like our financial structure, the money that we spend, is enough to basically compete with that?
Well, it's always hard to say if money is enough, because it's a tricky question also to kind of count how much money is actually flowing into something. But I think we are getting there, and we are getting bigger and bigger funds for startups. We are getting larger and larger also public projects like the Quantum Flagship and other things. And so I think we are seeing a change. For example, now we are talking about the European Chips Act, which is a multi-billion euro project, all these things. So there's a lot of money now being activated in Europe. And I think altogether it is enough to also then compete globally on a big scale.
Talking ecosystems, I'd like to address one question from the public viewers to Mr. Axmann. The question is, if we need new materials, semiconductors for this technology, so all sorts of stuff that we definitely not in the whole produce here in Europe. Now, where is it? Do we have this in Europe, or do we depend on others? So how can we actually build this ecosystem that everything we need is made and is built in Europe?
I think the ecosystem is not that everything is built in Europe, but I think the essential parts should be produced, and the the knowledge should be available in Europe to produce quantum computers. And at the moment, what we see is there's an open race. Which quantum computer will scale and perform the best is not yet clear. So we have different solutions on the agenda, and we will see if we have central elements of the supply chain, as mentioned by Jan Goetz before, which are needed in Europe. We have to identify if we have possibilities to produce those elements of the supply chain also in Europe. But I think it's not yet clear, because the core question is at the moment, what is the best design, what's the best system, what's the best platform for qubits for the future? That's the ongoing activity at the moment.
Mrs. Baloo, I think you want to...
Yes. I would very much like to add something. So in the intro, you introduced me as the former member of the high-level steering committee. Well, in actuality, that's not actually correct. I'm the current member in the strategic advisory board of the quantum flagship. And one of our criteria for success is to have strategic independence, not interdependence, but strategic independence of that technology supply chain that will basically fuel this entire quantum revolution within Europe. So if we are beholden to certain countries for critical components, for computing, for sensing and metrology, for simulation, this is a no-go. This would not be considered a success in anyone's eyes. We're actually saying, since we recognize the strategic importance, we should be supply chain independent.
Mrs. Baloo, let's stick to that point. How do we get there? I mean, like, if we all agree with you, it's not easy. We've tried it in different fields of technology in the past years, and we seem to not get it there. Why would quantum be different?
Well, I think it's a really good point. I mean, look at the struggles we've had over 5G, for example. We knew that it was vital. We understand the importance, but it really didn't play up until the problem was an urgent one, and we didn't really have too many other options. So to go back to Jan's point, Jan Goetz, when he said, you know, we need to create this ecosystem, I firmly believe that this is the case, but that cannot be done without funding. So we need equal funding. If you take a look at the people who we're competing with, the geographies of China and the United States, the one thing they have going for them is this funding situation, not just from private companies like IBM, Microsoft, and Google, but also from public institutions. We need to join that story up in Europe. We need member state contributions, we need Central European funding, and we need the private sector to play together in order to create this very strong, powerful community that will basically make this future stability possible.
May I also add something? Because
yes, sure.
I mean, I feel that our moderators asked a question, why would this work for quantum? And they want to have an answer to that. And the answer is, it is already working for quantum. Because if I am looking at what was the starting before the ramp-up phase of the flagship, we had 0 startups in quantum being able to deliver the sort of value chain and the supply chain for quantum computers. And now we have 3, 4 of them, and Jan is chairing one of them. And then there is Alpine Quantum Technologies also in Austria with ion traps. And there is Pascal, which I already mentioned in Paris with the neutral atoms. And although, of course, we don't have the tech giants pouring billions into this in a single company. And so we are still catching up on superconducting qubits, but actually we are halfway there. Like Google has now this machine with a few dozen qubits, and IBM announced 100 something. And in our European project funded by the flagship, we are already in the next generation talking about 25, and we started from essentially 0 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. But in other fields such as ions and neutral atoms, we are really on par, really at the same level as the extra-European competition. And this happened over 3 years. We are making this happen, and now you can buy these machines and put them in a 19 inches rack into supercomputing centers across Europe. This is the idea of this infrastructure that we are starting, and the public hand, as Jaya was mentioning, is essential. Here is a big strength we have in Europe, and the results are already there. So it is already starting to work. We see the results.
I don't want to go too much into detail, but you now said something about neutral atoms and superconducting qubits, and I believe that not everyone out there knows what you're talking about. Can you just explain very briefly what all those different things are and how they all come together to be a qubit?
Yes. So superconducting qubits means some circuits which are cooled down to very low temperature. so that you have some currents which will never stop running, and they can go either left or right or different directions, and those are our zeros and ones. Instead, you know, if we speak about atoms, in atoms, we know, I mean, from school, you know, there are electrons running around in the atom. Now, details are not important, but there, my zeros and ones are different orbits of my electron, either the electron very close to the nucleus or orbiting around in a larger space. And those are my zeros and ones. And the advantage for atoms and ions is I don't need to cool them down to very low temperature. So even at room temperature, I manipulate them with lasers. I trap them in vacuum, and then I'm able to manipulate them and to use them as qubits. And this is also fascinating because this is something which the founding fathers of quantum mechanics thought it would be impossible. They said it would be ridiculous, you know. Schrödinger said famously, it's ridiculous to imagine to experiment with a single atom. It is much more reasonable to imagine to raise a pterodactyl in a zoo. And nowadays we do it, you know, every day in all labs around the world. You can buy one of these machines. So these are different embodiments. We do not yet know, as Jaya said, we do not have like the silicon, like in classical computing. It could be one or the other platform. We are still developing them. And those are different ways in which you can realize your qubits.
We were talking about political support earlier. I want to come back to that. Mr. Goetz, do you feel that the politicians support you enough, or do you think there could be a little bit of more support? Maybe, well, there has to be more outreach and, yeah, well, how do you see the situation for your startup?
Yeah, I mean, support can come many ways. And we talked a little bit about financial support, and I think especially what we have seen with all these Corona programs that have been set up for to kind of revive the economy. There's a lot of money now flowing into the field, and I think for the time being that's good. But of course, we also need other support on the large scale if we want to be able to compete. And this contains support on the talent side, people side. So one kind of scarcity that we have is to find good people working who have know-how in quantum computing. And this is why it's so important, for example, to have also projects like the flagship and others where people are educated that then the industry can hire. But then nowadays, the technology, as you said, it's very strategic and kind of big forces are acting there. And of course, this is something where it's also very important then to have this kind of very high level support from the politicians to make sure that this ecosystem can grow in a, let's say, relatively protected way where startups can grow so that these kind of big strategic forces are not disturbing so much what is happening locally in this kind of very sensitive phase of the creation of the ecosystems. But I think the politicians, to answer your question, the politicians, they have realized the importance and they want to help as much as they can. But of course, this means that also we, and with me, I mean the whole community in quantum, needs to educate them and tell them what they could do or should do in order to help them guiding their decisions.
Talking about politicians, a very good point in helping guiding them. Mrs. Baloo, let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity. You're an expert in that. So we've spoken quite a bit about how nice quantum is and what possible nice outcomes they have. It's not everything needs to be necessarily nice. Talking about cybersecurity for a little bit, maybe you want to get into that point why quantum could also be a potential risk.
So it's really because, you know, the first question you asked me, which is what are the use cases of a quantum computer? The first one that was thought of that would be a perfect thing for a quantum computer to solve are the difficult math problems that we have based all of our modern cryptography on. So everything that we use for electronic banking or shopping at Zalando or whatever we do, that is resting on a cryptographic layer, public key cryptography, that we use all over the world. And that very security layer could be threatened by a sophisticated enough quantum computer with enough qubits and stability, et cetera, that would be able to solve the integer factorization problem. So we already have the algorithms that would be required to solve the problem. We just need the computing architecture to actually be able to carry that algorithm out. What I would like to see at the same time that we do not hinder the development of all of the innovation and advancement that we know that quantum technologies can bring us, I'd like to make sure that we have a forward defense type of attitude, like a very offensive attitude, to think about how do we make sure that everyone is ready for embracing this wonderful quantum future by making sure that our defenses are in place. And we know what we need to do. And those are things like, putting together this new quantum internet and enabling a sort of foundational communications secrecy, but also looking at technologies like quantum key distribution just for specific point-to-point connections, as well as advantages from post-quantum cryptographic algorithms, where even if we have a quantum computer, would potentially still be unbroken. So we know what to do. It's just the hard work of trying to actually get it done.
I want to add another question from the viewers. So how do you rate the danger, Mrs. Baloo, that quantum systems might break all existing encryptions yet, or do you think quantum encryption will be developed fast enough?
So we have methods to develop post-quantum cryptography or quantum safe cryptography. So we have those algorithms, but putting them in place requires vendors to take them on board, standardization to be conducted across all of the different geographies, and to have this, again, just like the ecosystem we have for quantum technologies, to have a similar ecosystem for enabling all of these mechanisms to interoperate. And again, that's really the hard work. It's not so difficult to have the technology, but the application of the technology and thinking about it consistently across every place where we use our current asymmetric cryptography today, that's what it's about. And yes, there is a threat that it will break everything we use now to communicate publicly to each other that is asymmetric cryptography. If we use symmetric keys, there's some longevity in that, and also for different types of cryptography we use, like for local storage, etc. These are not necessarily under threat.
Mm-hmm. Talking about,
can I interject? Can I add just one little thing, because you also asked, will quantum cryptography develop fast enough? And once again, it already happened. You can purchase this. Okay, there are companies in Europe. Actually, Europe is the market leader. The strongest companies in this are located in Europe, and you can buy devices which transmit individual photons, and they enable you unhackable communication by the laws of nature. And actually, we are creating among the initiatives, not just in the quantum flagship, but at European level in what we can call the quantum fleet, we are creating a European quantum communication infrastructure, EuroQCI, in which we are going to deploy this throughout all of Europe. So this is very strongly developing. There has been, like 2 days ago, an announcement that the world market leader in quantum key distribution set up shop, a new company in Austria in order to be able to access and participate in this development. So it is really bubbling up exactly in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Axmann, but now that we've heard that it's already purchasable in Europe, which is a good thing, there might be regions out there, and I guess you know what regions I might be talking about, who might not put a solution like this out on the market. They're just going to imply it, they just research it in, let's say, in the public sector. So, and everyone knows I'm probably talking about Chinese companies or the Chinese government. But let's talk on that topic. What kind of regions are you actually looking at that could be potentially be a very, let's put it positively, a very good competitor to what we're doing in Europe?
Yeah, you mentioned already. I think the competitors are worldwide seen, especially China, of course, and we do not know very much about what's going on there. And the other competitors are in North America, of course, so Canada, USA, the United States. So that are the areas where we are looking at. But basically, if we are talking about development of an ecosystem, we do have the fertile soil with our academia in Europe, with our research institutes, and this is a very good basis we have in Europe. And on top of this, we do now have all the small companies which are starting to develop the systems. And if we compare 2015 to 22 to 21, we saw that we have multiplied the number of companies active in Europe and active, of course, in North America. And if I see the numbers, they are in a similar range. So we do have a good chance in Europe also with our companies to compete really in those areas and to cover the entire ecosystem of quantum computing.
Mrs. Baloo, you are in the software field, and there's one other question from the viewers, and the question is, if the quantum computer is the quantum computer the real important thing? So I guess the person is talking about the hardware, or is the future MS-DOS for the quantum computer the more important thing?
I don't think we can actually separate the importance of either the hardware or the software or the algorithmic basis that will be able to solve all of the different problems and use cases that we talked about. So there's multiple things that would need to be there in order to support this. But if I could, I'd just like to add one quick comment about China, which is that, you know, it's not that we're completely unknown about some of the developments in China. Yes, the Chinese are more closed than other economies, but we already know they've got, in some respects, a head start. For example, they had a 2,000 kilometer node-to-node network for communication secrecy that they developed, and is fully deployed between Beijing and Shanghai. We know that. They announced it. It's very public. And they did this when Tommaso was inaugurating the first basis, the high-level steering committee in Amsterdam. They had already announced this. They're also the first in the world to launch a satellite which can communicate with quantum secrecy back to Earth. And they've already demonstrated this also by having like a video conference call between the satellite Missions and Austria, so at the University of Austria. So they've done quite some things and proven their merits in the field. So it's not like they're behind. We absolutely do not know everything that's going on now, but we know that in some respects they started before.
I want to stick with the viewers' questions once more because it's rated very high up. And the question is, I'd like to ask Mr. Goetz, does a quantum computer have benefits in regard to energy consumption? I think we heard that earlier, but how high are those? So what can you actually achieve while using quantum technology in making energy consumption lower?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I guess that many people would like to have a very concrete answer to, but it's not so trivial to answer. So the total energy consumption to solve a problem is the power that the computer needs times multiplied with the total time. And this already shows you that there you have two variables. One is how long does it take to kind of finish the calculation, and the other one is the power consumption of the system. And the thing is that for most of the algorithms, we don't exactly know what is the, for example, total system size of the quantum computer that we need, and what is the total time that it needs to calculate it. So in this sense, there's quite some uncertainty. But the idea is, for example, if we have these problems that have been mentioned, where a quantum computer can outperform a classical systems by orders of magnitude in time, then it's very likely that the total energy consumption is lower than for the classical computer. But to put any numbers there, I don't really dare doing it. But this is something that there are, for example, groups that are investigating it. Quantum for Climate, for example, is such a group. And this is something that we are also, as a company, are looking into. And I think on the long run, of course, we have to keep in mind that this is one main driver, because if you look at the total power consumption of today's data centers, how much power these huge buildings full of computers are consuming, this can be easily 10 megawatts of power per center, then we need to reduce this somehow. So we need to have some disruptive technology that brings down the power consumption. And I think that's my gut feeling, is that quantum computers will be able to reduce, at least for the computational path, the power consumption. Of course, then there are, again, different aspects like data storage and data transmission and all of this. But for the computational path, I think we can get power reduction or energy reduction.
Mr. Calarco, so it all sounds really sexy. So there's less energy, there is a lot of possibilities. You're very positive about where we are in Europe at the moment. Meanwhile, usually what drives the technology is, let's say, the market, right? It's companies that are investing in the startups, that are investing in the technology, that actually are customers at some degree. Now, especially in Germany, sometimes it feels companies are, let's say, maybe a little bit hesitant when it comes to investing into new technologies. How do you feel about this? Do you think that this might be a hindering point, or do you think that's going to change?
Well, I hope it's going to change. Certainly, Germany is not in a very strong position in this. Chancellor Merkel, when she appointed us to give this expert report that you mentioned already, in the context of the Bundesinnovationsdialog, the Federal Innovation Dialogue, she was very explicitly asking some very high-level representative of German industry, not only for interest in using quantum computers, but really in making quantum computers. And especially, you know, in terms of what we already discussed, in terms of creating the whole supply chain in order really to, you know, create value here. And this has not yet happened. We have not yet seen a commitment, an interest, an engagement in making these machines in our country, as well as we are seeing in the US. Now, I asked this question several years ago. I flew to Los Angeles and I asked Hartmut Neven, who is a German person, by the way, from Aachen, not far from me here. And he is the leader of the responsible for the quantum lab in Google. So I said, Hartmut, what can, also on behalf of the European Commission, what is your advice? What can we do to stimulate a comparable level of engagement from the European industry, as we see from Google? And Hartmut said, you cannot, because you do not sit on a pile of cash. And then I came back, and on the way before going to Brussels, I asked the CEO of Bosch, Volkmar Denner, you know, I mean, what kind of counter-argument can I bring? And Mr. Denner said, no, he is right. And why? Because the huge profit margins from the internet revolution, they sit there. So Google can afford doing that. They can afford, you know, betting a few billions, literally, on this. And it's not like the European industry does not have the vision or the courage. It's just the profit margins are not there. But of course, this is a Teufelskreis. It is a vicious circle. which is bringing you, you know, in the situation in which you never come out of this. So this is exactly what we are trying to stimulate with the huge stimulus package from the federal government in Germany, in France, and also at European level to really come out of this. We see more courage from small companies now. We are strongly hoping that the next stage will see strong engagement also from the big companies.
So let's talk business cases. Mr. Axmann, what business cases can be here in Europe with German companies, with European companies, so that they actually want to invest money and want to bring the whole technology forward, because we need those companies to actually have use cases and to bring the whole technology forward?
Maybe let me add something to the words from Tommaso. Clearly, I see also the same. Many of the SMEs, of the startups, are active in assembling entire quantum computing systems at the moment. But it's not that the industry is not in the background. They are also involved in those projects, and they support those projects partly with delivering some sub-work packages within those entire systems. So it's clear it's mostly the smaller companies, but it's not that the German industry is not willing to collaborate and to support the development of quantum computer. Concerning the business case at the moment, I think, is it's hardware, it's software, it's applications, so algorithms. And I think it's important that we drive all those areas in the area of quantum computing together, because what we see at the moment from DLR with our initiative, that many of the big providers, especially non-European providers, the business case is to offer the quantum computing capacities within Europe and to see what the companies, let me say in the area of simulation of chemicals or drug development, what they do on those systems, and to learn how to use those business models on their system. So it's happening basically the same like years ago when all our data has been given to big data centers across the pond, and the data is processed, and we are getting simply the results. So the business case in Europe is definitely to cover the entire value chain, but it's not yet clear, as I mentioned already. We do not see which platform will be the best one at the moment. We do not see which area of application, which algorithm is the best one. So there's a lot of development at the moment, and I think it's good for the companies to have an entire system able to deliver the aspects hardware, software, and algorithms, also to see the potential grow in value, as Jan said already. The grow in value for the customer. Finally, that's what counts for the business models.
Mrs. Baloo, towards the end, because we've now talked where we are, where we want to be, where we how to get there. And then we see the possible outcome. We've spoken about the possible outcome, and it could be huge, right? Or it will be huge even. And you've mentioned quite an interesting case in the beginning. Do you feel like we should train society for that kind of impact? Because we've seen transformation can actually scare people. If it's like too much and if it's a change that goes too quickly, people sometimes tend to move back a little bit and be hesitant to use it or be there or be a part of it. How do we deal with that problem?
I think, there's a really good point that was made earlier about you don't need to understand the technology necessarily to its core level in order to be able to use it successfully. And we need to kind of stimulate the successful use and application of quantum technologies throughout our society. That could mean having national education programs. It could mean making sure our ecosystems are good and healthy. It could mean, ensuring that our supply chain dependency is manageable. But it also means holding on to intellectual property for long-term wealth creation and prosperity across Europe. So all of those different components are the things that we need to prepare our society for, because currently in every other field of major technological innovation or revolution, we've lost some of that. Either the knowledge and workforce, so we have a knowledge scarcity, take for example, cybersecurity, or supply chain issues like we had with 5G, or the inability to hold on to intellectual property that was created in Europe, but then eventually leaked, like the data center cases that we talked about just now with our data going everywhere. So really being able to do all of those things well has to be the underpinnings of a successful quantum revolution.
So you said now that, of course, not everyone has to know about it to actually use the technology. But we were talking earlier about people that actually have to be the great minds, the bright minds to bring the technology forward. And Mr. Goetz, for your company, it's in your own interest to have talents, to have people who actually know about it. And I think we are at a point where it's not just physicists, it's becoming more and more engineers and people who need to be trained to actually know what they're doing. How do you actually support the education and training of young talents in IQM quantum computers?
Yeah, that's an important point. I think this is something that's also sometimes underestimated, that we bring in now experts from other fields like professional software developers, professional microwave engineers to build quantum computers with us. But it's also a pain point because it means we need to educate each other. The quantum physicist needs to learn the language of the other side and vice versa. So there's a lot of education going on within our employees or generally in the field, but then of course also we are educating students. So we are participating in quite a few university programs, and we are paying PhD students or even giving internships. And this is something that we use to actively give something back to the community in order, of course, with the hope that at some point we will have this very highly educated workforce. And there are many other means like hackathons. There are so many good initiatives out there to educate either the quantum experts or also the non-quantum experts to contribute to this big goal that we all have, which is building a large-scale quantum computer.
Mr. Axmann, maybe following up on that question. So we've spoken a lot what it needs. It needs an awareness. It needs educated people. It needs a little bit of money. It needs companies to be actively involved in it. Do you feel like, because sometimes, you know what I mean, like sometimes the problem tend to be on the edges of each little bubble, if I want to call it a bubble, don't get me wrong, it's not negatively meant. Do you feel like there is enough talking, enough communication, enough networking going on?
I think so. There is a lot of networking and a lot of communication, but I think the core problems are the talent, the hiring of talent, the keeping of IP in Europe, of course, and of course to get all the companies which start now. I said it already. Number of companies multiplied within the last year. We do need continuity on this within the next years. As Jan mentioned, we do need, for example, people who studied informatics, engineers, and it takes quite a while until the people are there, and it needs continuity in the development of the ecosystem. When people study 3 to 5 years, once they start into the ecosystem, it takes quite a long time, and I think that's important to keep an eye on this.
So we are reaching the very end of the discussion, and I have one last question to all of you. We were talking about all the important things about technology and stuff, but there are a lot of people watching who are not in the technology field, and they want to know, or we all want to know, when will it actually impact everybody's life and not just physicists and engineers? Maybe Mr. Goetz, you want to start. Is there a time frame you would say that's that's imaginable, that we will see actually something very useful?
Well, I think it's a smooth transition. It's not black and white that we say in year X it all starts, but it will be smooth. It will come from science, more the scientific problems, then maybe to other use cases. So I don't dare now giving out a single year, because I don't think that anyways that's the right way to do. But I think gradually we all should get prepared in it. And as Mr. Axmann said, it takes time. It takes time to educate people and society. So we better start now doing it to be ready whenever this time that you're mentioning is there.
Mr. Axmann, do you want to be more concrete, or same time frame?
I think the time frame, the people expect changes within the next 5 to 10 years. So it's not really clear when we will see it. And especially having a look at the algorithms, the first algorithms have been developed in the 90s, and before it hasn't been sure if quantum computing has any advantage at all. And then the algorithms surfaced, and we saw more algorithms developed within the last years. So there might be changes within the next years, but it's not yet clear when this will happen and what the definite impact is.
Mrs. Baloo, how about you? 5 to 10 years is definitely more concrete. Maybe you say 7.
You know, just to kind of disagree with my colleagues on this panel and to be controversial, let's say that my hope is that we have something meaningful that will touch people directly by 2030.
That's good. That was almost 7. I was always good by 7, so that's 8. We have 8 to beat, Mr. Calarco.
Yes, so your question is, when will it impact everybody? And so we have a plan for this. In quantum communication, we target this to happen by 2030, by the end of the digital decade, in like quantum security available for everybody, to be in the backbone in the next 5 to 7 years, and by 2030 really to be available for whole of society for quantum communication. And we also have a number which we gave, which we have in our strategic research agenda for the flagship, which is underlying the efforts in the European Quantum Computing and Simulation Infrastructure, and which is also given in our Expertenratpapier, in our expert group report to Mrs. Merkel, which is not before 15 years for everybody to enjoy the benefits of quantum computing. I am sorry, okay? But I think that we also should be careful with over-promising. I'm the director of Institut of Quantum Control in Jülich, and I think quantum hype control is a very important task that we should take upon us.
Thank you very much. I have nothing to add. Thank you very much for these insights into a world that takes us to the edge of the imaginable. Thank you for joining us on this panel.
Thank you very much.
To all of you. And well, how we can shape the quantum future and secure Europe's serenity. I think we had a wonderful discussion about that in the last 50 minutes.
Definitely. I very much enjoyed it, and I'm very much looking forward to actually keep on going, to have this discussion going. We still have a little bit of time to discuss until we see that, if it's going to be 5 or 15 years. Let's see where we're all going to be at that point. I can't wait actually to see and what's going to be it, when we all going to be, you know what I mean, actually feeling it ourselves, and then we look back at this discussion and see who got it right, and maybe we all got it perfect, and maybe we're all even surprised what more it can possibly do. Thank you very much from me. Thank you very much for the viewers to be with us today. It was very nice to have you. Thank you for the questions. Always good to speak to you.